morning, everyone. Hi, my name is Caroline Francois, and I am the Congressman's Community Relations Director. Welcome to Congressman DeSaulnier's Town Hall on how Democrats are fighting back against the administration's policies in Congress. We're so glad you were able to join us tonight. I'm going to share a brief run of show, and then we'll get started. As many of you may have noticed when we walked in, there was a question card on each seat. If you have a question you'd like to ask the congressman, please fill out your question card, and we will get to as many questions as possible. As you might have guessed, given the number of people in attendance tonight, look around you, we will not get to every question. But this is the key piece of information. If you complete your question card fully with your contact information and, importantly, legibly, we need to be able to read it, we'll respond to you after the town hall. If you have a complete question card, please feel free to raise it in the air, and one of my colleagues will come collect it. Thank you all. I can tell none of you have questions today. While my colleagues are working hard collecting your question cards, I'm just going to briefly introduce them so you know who to look for. If you need any help or if you have question cards, we'll still come get you. So you were checked in outside by my colleagues Ryan Endem and our wonderful intern V. And in the back, I see my colleague Kaylee, who's working hard to make sure the tech goes well on during the town hall. We've got Nawal here and Brooke, and then our incredible, as the lights come on, our incredible district director, Janessa Oriel, who keeps everything running. So in just a few moments, the congressman will provide an update from Washington, D.C., but first, we have several elected officials in the audience tonight. The mayor of Concord, Obringer, is here with us. And we're also so pleased to have Susanna Meyer, the mayor of Brentwood, and Belle Law, a Pleasant Hill council member, in attendance tonight. And now I will turn it over to Mayor Carlin Obringer to welcome you to Concord and to introduce the congressman.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Carlin Obringer. I am proud to welcome you this evening here to the city of Concord. I'd like to thank the congressman for choosing to hold this important event here in Concord, and to Mount Diablo Unified School District for hosting us. And I'm going to introduce the congressman in just 1 minute, but I wanted to share 2 ways that the city of Concord is being impacted by what's happening in Washington, D.C. in terms of budget and people. So I was just in Washington, D.C. last week meeting with the congressman as well as our U.S. senators, and we're fighting in Concord to get $20.6 million that was already allocated to us for nonpartisan things like road repair, like tree planting, like replacing our streetlights with LEDs. This funding should not be frozen. I did get a chance to meet with a woman from the the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, Christine Serrano-Glassner. If you want her contact information, I'm going to be sitting right there, and I'm happy to share it. So we're working on getting that unfrozen. But this is unprecedented. And then the other aspect is people. How many people here are a federal employee or know a federal employee? Yes. Well, guess what? I know one too. My brother-in-law, Jason, who has been a hard-working EPA employee for over 20 years, and he's watching his young colleagues who went into the EPA recently to go into environmental justice and to protect our water and our air, and they're getting doged. So this is not okay, so I'm really glad that you're here tonight. We're gonna be hearing from the congressman as what we can do, but I just want to encourage us. You know, I came here tonight in an electric vehicle. It's a Nissan Leaf. We also here in Concord have Mackeys available, Ioniqs at the Ford and Hyundai dealerships. So I just want to encourage folks, let's use our people power, our dollars, so that we can take back our democracy. And now it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure to introduce our Congressman, Mark DeSaulnier, so we can learn how to get into some good trouble to take back our democracy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And being a former local elected official for a long time and a former mayor of Concord, I have the distinction of the shortest term as the mayor of Concord. It was only 4 months. And then I got appointed to the Board of Supervisors back when I had an R after my name, for those of you who are old enough to remember that. But I got to hand it to Carlin. You got to sell cars when you're in local government. Without going to the complexities of Prop 13 and municipal funding, it's always nice to have the sales tax from cars coming in because it pays for a lot of things. I want to thank you all for being here. Really wonderful turnout. These are difficult times. I have had more town halls than any member of Congress in the last 11 years. Thank you. And I've liked to do them since I was on the city council 35 years ago. It's just, and I'm sure it's from my experience as a small retailer, not far from here, one of the restaurants, the restaurant I own the longest. Uh-oh, I have a couple customers still. Oh yeah, I remember you. We asked you to leave. It's the lampshade thing. But these kind of engagements are so important, and it's wonderful to see people out, but it's also discouraging to see how disruptive they can be. We can be civil, we can be passionate about our disagreements. We've gone through a lot in this country over the almost 275 years of its existence. But when we do our best, we understand that the United States has attempted to do something on a scale that no one else in history has done, is bring people from all over the world, from different cultures, from different backgrounds, and get us to a point where we try to govern ourselves. And you can only do that if you accept the fact that this is a big country with a lot of differences, but you still can be very passionate about those differences. And in particular right now, what we swear our oath to, whether you're a planning commissioner, I think it was probably the first time I did it, a police officer, or the President of the United States, or a member of Congress, is an oath to faithfully follow and defend the Constitution of the United States. For those, how many of you have come to our town halls before? All right, so I try not to be repetitive for all of you, but you know I like to read, and I was a history major, just read a wonderful book by a scholar, Harvard and Yale, but he runs the Constitutional Center in Philadelphia. It's called The Pursuit of Happiness, Why Virtue is Important to American Democracy. And he writes about how the founders, for all their shortcomings, wrote about the Greeks and the Romans and the traditions of people who are in office in public life and all the federal and state and local employees. People need to trust us, knowing that we're not perfect and we're humans and we make mistakes. So that idea of passionate discourse and respect for one another, but when people attack the Constitution of the United States, we get in trouble. That's why we had a civil war where almost 10% of the U.S. population was killed or wounded. And we don't want to go back So we have to be principled, and we're fighting. We're fighting against an administration that I don't agree with very often at all, and I don't think shows the respect that the U.S. Constitution deserves, and the people who have fought and died for it, who have very different perspectives, and many of them would have voted for him. But that's why this is such difficult time. So I want to get to your questions. We have abbreviated our PowerPoint. If I go too quickly, it's available on our website and on our social media. So that's the district. Every 10 years, we're required all levels of government to elect people from district as opposed to at large for the jurisdiction. When I ran for the city council, it was 5 members elected at large. Now they're separate districts, a fifth of each. For Congress, so it's based off the census. Every census, you have to reapportion the districts. In California, we lost 1 seat, so we went from 53 to 52, the largest delegation appropriately because we're the largest country. The old district that I served for the first 8 years in Congress was a little more north, east-west. It went from Richmond, El Cerrito, Kensington, and then it covered downtown Antioch, but didn't pick up Oakley and Brentwood, and now I represent almost all of Antioch. And then it took us down the 680 corridor into most of Dublin and Alameda County and San Ramon, that on the previous map I didn't. I've represented at some point every city in Contra Costa between my predecessor, George Miller, if you remember him, a wonderful friend. He likes, yeah, thanks. He's probably watching on Zoom. I'll hear from him later. It's always great when you get a phone call from George, because when you answer the phone, he goes right to the point. It's not like, how are you doing, Mark? Nice day. How'd the Giants go? It's just very passionate. But he liked to say that about my career, we're friends, he thinks he's funny. He says, yeah, Mark can't keep a job. He just keeps getting one after the other. Yuck, yuck, yuck. All right, next slide. So in every level of government, we have subcommittees, city council, board of supervisors, the legislature, and Congress. Generally, you go on ones or try to get on ones that you have expertise in or that your constituents think are important. I can tell you my over 3 decades in Contra Costa politics, those 3 things, transportation, education, and labor, workforce, are always pulled at the top of people's interests. Transportation is obvious. We have in the eastern Alameda and Contra Costa, we have 4 of the 10 mega commutes in the United States. You know that, young people moving further out to buy housing and then driving back in for their jobs. And we've done a lot of work to try to reduce that. Let's see, in education, obviously, today, the President of the United States is attempting to close the Department of Education. He can't do that. It was created, you're right, and it would be a bad thing. Benjamin Franklin said at the founding of this country, and it's true today, the best investment we can make in America is in education. And I should thank the Mount Diablo School District for hosting us today, so this wonderful facility. So the Department of Education, while we're on that, federal funds in education are roughly 12 to 15% of the total. Historically, it has been about local control in this country, always. So saying that he wants to return it more to the locals, it already is. We're the least centralized, and it should be, we're the least centralized of the industrial countries. Having said that, having a federal agency that collects data and shows where we're succeeding and where we're failing and where the trends are really important. And then secondarily, in my lifetime, we have an increase in kids in public schools that have special needs, whether it's autism in particular. So when he takes that, he's got to move it somewhere, theoretically. And those kids who are the most disadvantaged and by the way, it's everywhere in this country. And we're trying to get more and more information from the National Institutes for Health and the CDC, why these trends are so up in social media and how people get information, especially kids. But, you know, the current Secretary of Health and Education has his theories, not based on research. But it's very, very important that the Federal Department of Education, is there waste? There's always waste in every organization. All of us do that. We're human beings. Can we be analytical about how we improve, how we take taxpayer funding and make it more efficient? I've always said that should be nonpartisan. I've told my colleagues that I work with, if we want to spend it one way, but we want to be efficient, the first thing we should agree on, we should make sure that taxpayers' dollars are efficiently spent, whether you're Democrat or Republican. I know there are stereotypes about that, but yeah. And some of my feelings about that is from my retail experience in the restaurant business. I was sometimes derisively referred to by more creative people as a numbers guy. So I spent hours trying to figure out how to squeeze that little profit that you get out of restaurants. And I like that about government too, is trying to figure out how you make it work better, which, as I say, should be nonpartisan. Then there's a question of priorities about how you spend the money or how much you spend the money. On transportation infrastructure, one of the big accomplishments in my time in Congress, since I've spent so much time on this, I was a chair of both committees of transportation and legislature. I was the first freshman member of the State Assembly to be chair of transportation. Is making it work. But we did the largest investment in infrastructure, over $1.2 trillion, since the Eisenhower administration. It was the largest overall ever, but proportionally, since President Eisenhower invested in the interstate highway system. So that was a real big accomplishment. I had a couple bills in there. Mega projects, if you follow some of my work on the eastern span of the Bay Bridge and high-speed rail, which I haven't voted for. I sometimes get in trouble with some of my colleagues because I don't think we're doing it the right way. It's not because I don't believe it. It's just there are a lot of things that I disagreed with on that. I thought we should have gone down Highways 5 because we already had most of the right-of-way, which has held us up on the approach we're taking. There are reasons to do it the way we did it, but I disagreed with it and have. If you remember the eastern span of the Bay Bridge, I spent a lot of time on that. So I got a bill in about mega projects, about more accountability on these projects that are billions of dollars, and more accountability for the contractors as well. The other one I'm proud of is the Clean Corridors bill. As many of you know, I was appointed by 3 different governors to represent the Bay Area on the California Air Resources Board, 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat. And I love that job. It's really interesting. Richard Nixon signed the U.S. Clean Air Act to clean up air quality. He created the California waiver that the current administration is trying to get rid of, but it's in statute, and the courts have upheld it. Ronald Reagan, as governor of California, signed the California Clean Air Act. This is when, obviously, the leaders of the parties had different views about air quality. It was before we knew about carbon emissions. So it's traditional pollutants, and for us here in Contra Costa, because of our industrial belt, it's a big issue for us. And those refineries, as we transition to clean fuel, and I appreciate Harlan's comments about how we're transitioning, which I've been very supportive of. And this particular bill I'm getting to, Clean Corridors bill creates $8 billion of funding for EV charging stations and hydrogen charging stations, and they put them where the market is, and the market is here, Los Angeles, Seattle, Washington, Boston, what the car companies call early adapters. They know that the market is willing to try new things, particularly here. So we're trying to get those placed in the 680 corridor in 101 because that's where the market is. And then we can show the rest of the country how well it works as a business model. And it does. The Chinese now have 1.5 million charging stations. The United States has about 200,000. They're way ahead of us when it comes transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables and alternatives. And that's a real problem for us. I tell my Republican colleagues sometimes, I said, your grandkids are all going to be driving Chinese cars if we don't get back to investing in this technology. And the car companies know that too. So those were 2 big things that were in the infrastructure bill. We just did reauthorization of the Federal Aviation Administration. I put a lot of work into that. I'm on the committee, the subcommittee after the near miss at SFO when I first got to Congress, where Air Canada flight came within 54 feet of landing on top of 3 full planes waiting to take off. The pilots had misaligned, and they thought the taxiway was the runway. And if it wasn't for the co-pilot on the first plane, a United plane, telling the tower 54 feet. So since then, I've been very involved in it, and that was nonpartisan. The Transportation and Infrastructure Committee takes great pride in being the least partisan committee in the Congress. You don't hear about us a lot because we do work. The chair of the committee, Sam Graves, is from Missouri, conservative Republican. I consider him a friend. We work very hard together. He's a pilot. We worked on the aviation part, and then Rick Larson from Everett, Washington, is the ranking Democrat. So that was a real accomplishment. We put lots more money into technology that we should have done a long time ago. So the near misses, we're really concerned, obviously, and how close that disaster came to happen. Of course, what just happened in D.C., where I fly into National Airport, Reagan Airport, those things are going to happen more often if we don't get that investment and do what we did. And we worked with all the stakeholders on that, private companies and public sector. So flooding the zone is what we now know. Steve Bannon and the administration, that was part of their theory, is you just flood the zone. They use the expression, it's a sports expression, and you send so many things, so many receivers into one part of when you in football that there's not enough defenders to stop it, but it's also a distraction. So this is the first bullet is really important. When you're in the minority, and this is part of the presentation, when you're in the majority, you don't have to allow bills to come to the floor. We'll write bills, we'll submit it literally to the hopper. If you've heard, it's in the hopper expression. There is a hopper that's been there for as long as the country's existed, right by the speaker's podium at the House of Representatives. You literally take it down there, and then you never hear it again unless if the speaker of either party doesn't want it to go anywhere. Different in the legislature. In most legislatures, there are rules. Like in California, if you submit one of your bills, it has to be heard by the Rules Committee that has to refer to a committee of jurisdiction. So if it's transportation, it goes to transportation. In Congress, it never gets to rules if the speaker doesn't want it to go anywhere. And that's why a lot of this is so frustrating. I like the other policy because at least you got the bill to have a hearing. And they had to, with specific rules, decide whether it would go to the Committee of Transportation. And if you're in the minority and the majority doesn't like it, they kill the bill by not voting for it in committee. But then you've had a public hearing and you've had a debate, and people are on record, at least in those committees, about what their feeling is, their positions are. And then people in the legislature can be held to accountability more than we are because you just put them in and nothing ever happens. So these are some of the flooding of the zone. I won't go through all of them because I'm sure some of them are in questions. Thanks. So we are introducing bills, but as I just explained, they don't go very far. So we're putting a lot of time into being on the record about fighting back. To the degree the rules allow us to do this. And then we just have to keep working on trying to get 3 Republicans to join all of us to agree with us. And the Lincoln once said, with public sentiment, anything's possible in the United States. Without it, no bill, no statute really has any effect. So there is an importance to you being here and expressing yourselves. And of course, in closer districts, it's even more important with the margin of error between Republicans and Democrats. And when I started in politics, the old rule was people would vote for people, 25% to 30% of the voters would vote for somebody in the other party if they liked them and felt good about it. Now it's 1%. So it's just an illustration of how polarized we've become in the United States. And it's a good thing when I was a Republican that you Democrats voted for me, because I guess it's a good thing. I wouldn't be here. So this is probably the most important. If you want to go through this, as I said, it's online. It's on our social media. But we've been very successful in winning in court. As I think I told you, first term, we, and I mean by we, not Democrats in Congress, but a coalition. A lot of these cases, we are prohibited. We don't have standing or specifically prohibited. And the reason for that is you want want to keep the separation of the three branches of government. But it's still, we're still allowed to join with people, not on amicus briefs a lot of times. Sometimes you are, depending on what the statute says and the subject is. But it's a lot of these groups that we're working with together. So I mentioned it before, Trump lost 78% of the court cases related to actions in the first administration. People talk about how he learned more. Well, we learned more too, and that's why we're winning in court. This is my favorite quote, but I had a struggle. There was another one where a judge that I think he appointed said, "Were lawyers involved in this case when you brought it to me?" So I like that one too. But that one obviously is, this country was formed. The madness of King George, right, was to not have a king. The founders wanted power to be diffused. And that's the whole point of our government, is not to have one person have power. And it can be frustrating as heck. But that's the point, is to get us all to work together to try to get bills that are a reflection of all of us. And we make mistakes, obviously. In terms of fiscal responsibility, this is just illustrative. Congressman Miller's very proud of that first, because he was very involved in that. It was called pay-as-you-go. So Democrats said, we're not going to pass a budget where we have to rely on not identifying where the source is going to come from. And in California, the Constitution requires you to have a balanced budget. And there are mechanisms to borrow money and to say it's balanced based on the Constitution. The United States government doesn't have that, and that's one of the problems, is we can go out and print money. California and states can't print money. They can borrow money, and of course we borrow money too. All right, next. And this is one of the most important slides. We lost the election. We meaning Democrats, party on it. We lost the presidency, we lost the Senate, we lost the House. We had lost the House the previous election as well. So you're in the minority, and you try to figure out how you get the votes in real time when I go back on Monday to get things done now, and not do it at the expense of sacrificing your principles. And there's a time to fight, and I'm sure there are questions about what the Senate did on the resolution. All of the House Democrats voted against that continuing resolution to go to. All except for one. One of my colleagues from Maine. Maine has 2 members of Congress. So voter turnout is important. We had a historic election 4 years ago, 5 years ago now almost, and the first one is sort of amazing. We lost the House of Representatives by 7,309 votes in the 3 House seats that flipped the majority. So when people say your vote doesn't count, that tells you you're wrong. So you got to read your voter's pamphlet, you got to be open-minded, and you've got to vote and participate. And we made mistakes too. I mean, I have some criticisms of how we ran campaigns, and I may be wrong, but there's a lot of people pointing. This is the basic problem, in my view, in this country right now. I spend a lot of time on this. I like to read. The concentration of wealth in this country right now is nothing wrong with people being successful, doing well based on hard work and their talents. But Lincoln said, wages and capital must always be balanced in the United States. If you lose them, you lose democracy. Do we have the Brandeis quote up there? Go back to here. We usually have a Louis Brandeis quote that I love that says, you can have democracy in America, or you can have the concentration of wealth in a few hands, but you can't have both. And that's what that picture is about. So those 3 people have more wealth than 166 million Americans combined. And the next chart shows you it hasn't always been that way. And you can see right here, starting after post-World War II, how close they were. So the top line, The red line is wages, what people make wages collectively. The blue line is the percentage of the gross domestic product. Both of these are percentage of gross domestic product. And so the red line is percentage in wages. The blue line is percentage in capital investments. So when they get way out of line is when we have these social problems. This is from Thomas Piketty, who wrote a Nobel Prize-winning book. Wrote a few, but one that just did the history of capitalistic economies, and his tedious book. It's hard. I had a professor I respect said, you know, you're one of probably only a few hundred people who actually got through that whole book. So I don't recommend that but it's remarkable because he knew he would be criticized, so he really went into detail about the history of all these different countries. And when you get this different, his basic theory is you have social violence and you have wars. The closer you get where everybody, and it's not subsidizing people, it's just having the tax code, in my view, be mindful that everybody's, the biblical expression that I remember from Catholic schools is those who are given much, those of us who are given much are required to give. I get it wrong, but it's like that. Okay, so I've talked enough for now. Now we'll go to questions. Thank you all. So some people say that we pick these, cherry pick them. We only cherry pick them if we can't read it. So we're now doing this so I can show people. Some people still don't believe that we're doing this. But that one's from my mother, so we'll take that one. Dear old mom's gone, so.
Okay, this question comes from Val and Gloria, who are from Richmond. It says, all our friends are in panic mode. Is there a plan? Is there hope?
What did Paine, you also know I like historical quotes. Thomas Paine said in the Revolution, these are the times that try men's heart. And he also said it's not a time for sunshine patriots. So this is hard. You have to be engaged. I talked about civic engagement, voting, reading your voter's pamphlet. But I think you need to get out at the town halls, but you also have to express your feelings. You have to do it in a way that doesn't hurt other people physically. You know, we've learned this in our history. We can be passionate, get in the streets. I've been down at the Tesla dealership for 3 of the last 5 weeks. I do it for therapy. I tell people every time I go down there, they ask me to speak, I said, I come back here to realize that there are people fighting. And when I say fighting, I'm just meaning that in a way that's, we work with the Walnut Creek Police Department, we go down there, but we express our feelings. And that message is being heard because it's happening all over the world, and the wealthiest man of the world has lost about 20 to 25% of his wealth within a period of time.
Thank you.
If you want to read a book about the history of him and Tesla, it's called Ludicrous. And I won't say any more about the author's position.
Okay, before we get to the next question, I just want to give folks who may still have a question card in their hand. I don't know if there are any. Okay, staff will come grab those from you. And time to pick the next question.
I think it was you, Ryan. They just didn't trust the Marine. Ryan over here is our deputy district director and does a great job. And he's also a former Marine, so we're proud of him.
All right, this question comes from Linda, Congressman. Linda asks, why are the actions thus far not considered a constitutional crisis? Trump and Musk are dismantling who we are as America.
I heard someone say last night it's not a constitutional crisis, it's a constitutional battle. That he's already, it's only a crisis, I think, and it's a semantics thing, based on legal verbiage. So it's a crisis because the President of the United States is, and you can argue over history. Presidents have taken different views in both parties about their administrative authority. We've had challenges. But this isn't like any other presidency in either party. He's just writing, like the Department of Education. There was even a story in the Washington Post today that said people from the White House were saying, we know that we don't have the legal authority, but he's going to sign this later in the afternoon. So if that's beyond what? Oh, criminal, okay. So the question is really more a question of semantics. Yeah, and the person you're talking about is a convicted felon.
Okay, this question comes from Joelle from Concord. If Trump and Republicans do not care about the rule of law and consistently break it, what are the consequences? When will the average person use their defying judge's order as president for their reason to break the law? It says, when will the average person use their defying, I think they're trying to say that when will someone else who's not the president use the president's blatant disregard as a basis to break the law?
Well, that's a good question. In my office in D.C., I've got big pictures that were given me by Assemblymember Bob Campbell, who was a mentor and a hero, God rest his soul, represented this area in West County for a long time. His two prints are Gandhi and King. So we've got two models there about how you break the law and confront people in a way that wins people over because you're being strategic about it. You're not running around the street breaking windows and losing people who you want to have on your side. You're being strong, you're being arrested in case of both of them when necessary, but you're doing it in a way that empowers more people. So I think the time is now to get, like, I'm still, and I will stay this way because my position, I think, is to do things like we're trying to organize more marches. One of the things we did the first, well, I can't organize them, but there are more people trying to do this. I'm actually prohibited by our rules as a member of Congress from actually organizing them. But we're in contact with, and the basic reason is, and it's hard for people to, we're doing this on taxpayers' funds, not on Republican or Democratic funds. So there are rules not to use taxpayers' funds in every level of government on political activities. It's sometimes hard because obviously this is political and it's because we're having this discussion. So as far as organizing, and we don't want them doing that either to the degree we can stop them, and we are, but there are a lot of partners you can work with. So we had the Women's March. How many people were in the Women's Marches? So we're trying to get those going again. Indivisible. How many people have done things with Indivisible? All of those things are really positive, and if you could, on our other side, outside of federal money on the politics side, we have infrastructure for me, and more of that activity will be over there as we get it more organized. Well, the problem with that is he's breaking the law, but the enforcement, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, gives him latitude as president that the rest of us don't have. And there are reasons for that. I don't agree with all of them. So that's a personal, I'm going to just, because we got to do this with all these people respecting you and trying to answer your question. But we've got to do this in a way that we win. And if we go out and attack each other, then we're back to the Civil War. So somewhere in between, and believe me, my level of frustration, my anger at what's happening, when I sit in that room and you people have given me the honor of going there in the House of Representatives, I've referred to it for a long time as a sancta sanctorum of human evolution. Humans have not tried to do this, and we have, Americans, for all our faults. I was one of the last people evacuated on January 6th. Let me tell you, I'm pretty angry and pissed off about what I see. So we've just got to be focused and forceful, and that may require breaking laws, but we've got to do it in a way that gets us to our ultimate goal, which is to stop this pain.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Elizabeth, who's also from Concord. What can we as individuals do to support the legal battles to the Trump administration?
Allergy season. Again, I can't use taxpayer dollars to tell you how to fight a political campaign, but there's plenty of information online. So Google it. And then, if appropriately, go to the people who are opposed to what's happening, like my political website, and ask that question. By the way, I'm very proud of the fact, I didn't mention this, that Leader Jeffries asked me to be the ranking member of the Ethics Committee. So I may frustrate some of you because I'm not as aggressive as some of my colleagues, but I do it for a reason, and it's my personal belief, too, that ethics are important in politics. And I don't mean to say that I'm not willing to throw an elbow or anything else when I think people are wrong. I learned that from George Miller, amongst other people. I'm sorry, you're supposed to be reading.
Okay, we have a question from Doug, who asks, what are we doing to call out the lies in the House, Senate, and the media?
Well, if you have time and watch C-SPAN, you can see what we're doing in committees and on the floor. We confront them every time we see them. I know it can be tedious watching public meetings, not the city council. They're always entertaining and interesting. So you can go there. We're doing it. We're fighting. One of the things I was really proud of being involved with when John Lewis was still there, I don't know if you remember this, a group of us, it became a bigger group, went and sat in the House because we wanted 2 bills on gun control to come to the floor. And we were trying to force then Speaker Ryan. Unfortunately, Speaker Ryan didn't have us arrested because a lot of us wanted to be arrested, including John Lewis, of course. Talk about a gift to be able to serve in the United States Congress with John Lewis and become friends with him. Thank you for letting me do that. And that's a good illustration, too, about history in America, and John Lewis is a good example. I mean, you've all seen that video of him being beaten in Selma. There's a guy who was fearless, but he used his courage in a way that helped get the Civil Rights Acts passed. And for all the struggles we've had, that was a huge step forward. John Lewis was a very special human being.
We're going to pick 2. Thanks, Congressman.
We didn't get that from, what am I trying to say? We're trying to be more efficient without you-know-who telling us how to be more efficient.
Okay, a question from Yvette, who says, Congressman Mark DeSaulnier has always fought for his constituents. There is no sign of Congressman DeSaulnier giving up. Please keep him in your daily prayers as he fights the historic inequality here and throughout America. Comment, but no question.
I'm glad I picked that one.
Okay, a question from April, who says, a very timely question. You stated at your previous town hall the Department of Education was a bureaucracy. It is also a cabinet-level agency. Doesn't the president have power to make changes? If you do not like what is going on, why do you continue to divide instead of trying to work with the administration to get a win for both sides?
So, this is a really good question, and I appreciate it. The way we change things is through the process. The president, in that instance, would get somebody in Congress to introduce a bill. It would go down to the hopper. The majority party would refer it to the Rules Committee, of which I was the vice chair for 4 years. The Rules Committee would have public hearings. They would refer it to the Committee of Jurisdiction. And then if it gets out of that, if there are financial elements to it, it would have to go through the same process for appropriations to appropriate the funds. Then it would go to the floor. If it wins all those, then it goes to the other house. If he wants to close or seriously modify anything that's been created by that process, he's got to go through the goddamn process.
Dennis asks, where is the Democrat response? Musk and Doge lie every day and control the narrative. Democrats never have an effective response. Commerce Secretary says, buy Tesla. No Democrat response.
I had a high school teacher who said, when you say never, you're probably wrong, because there's exceptions. We've been expressing this. Have we been doing it effectively? No. I've had 3 town halls in person since January 20th, and they're harder now, to be honest, because we need more space. The logistics of it are bigger. We've got to make sure that the city and the people who own it, we've got to make sure it's in our budget. So it does take longer than it used to. We're going to do more virtual town halls, because those are cheap and easy to do. I'm going to start doing them fairly regularly the last day I'm in D.C., so I can just give you an update. The challenge to that is if I do it, it's 3 hours. We're 3 hours behind. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to stop interrupting. One strike's enough, okay, because everybody else is here. If I don't give you the right answer, I'm happy to meet with you later or engage with you, or as always, you don't have to support me any longer. That's the way it works. I'm not trying to be insulting. So the answer to the question is we are. Are we doing it well? No. But we're fighting all the time. We just had our retreat last week, and we spent a lot of time, all of us, on this with our political people. Why are we failing? Why doesn't the American people know what we did those 2 years when President Biden was president of the United States and we had control of both houses? We passed the biggest transportation infrastructure investment in the history of the country. We passed the biggest investment in research in the history of the country that helps this area, with 3 national labs here and the University of California. We capped the cost of drugs, the drugs that keep me alive from my leukemia. They used to cost me $400 a day, and thank God I'm a member of the Contra Costa Health Plan as a county retiree. In Australia, the same drug costs $37 a day. In the EU, it's $90 a day. It's now $80 a day here, because we passed a law that said Medicare and Medicaid has to negotiate prices. Who wouldn't be for that? The Congress actually prohibited Medicare and Medicaid from negotiating better prices for Americans for pharmaceuticals, for prescription drugs. We did that. So if you get my message, this is what we're trying to do more and more of. I will say, I spend a lot of time raising money. I don't like it, and it goes to a bunch of consultants who then tell me how to be authentic. And I told it's too late for me. If they don't want me, I'm fine with that, but it's too late for me to be much different. And I think what people see in politicians is we've become too effective. You know, be articulate, be concise, be more concise, but at some point you got to be yourself, and humans understand that, irrespective of which party you're in. So we're trying to get the message out. I'm sorry I didn't answer it as quickly, and we're working on it all the time.
This is a related question from Nancy, who says, can we have a weekly minority report on C-SPAN to the media saying what is being done to stop Doge and Trump from their illegal destruction of our rule of law?
I'm going to get to the bottom. Do you see? People are upset because I'm not taking it from different parts. I think that's a great idea, and if we don't have it, we should have it, and I'll do everything to make sure we will, and then we'll put it on our website. It's either be on a government website or it'll be on the political website. And let me one thing I want to say about the wonderful people I get to work with. We have 12 to 15 people in our office in D.C., Antioch, and Walnut Creek. That's to serve 750,000 people. Before January 20th, we were getting about 1,000 emails a day. Now we're getting over 5,000. So we've been recognized. We're one of only 6 Senate and House seats twice by the Congressional Management Foundation. It recognizes high-performing offices. They're very well respected. We're one of 6, and it's because of these very hard-working public servants.
All right, the next question comes from Shauna, who asks, what are the 3 most powerful things regular citizens can do to fight against what we will not accept from Trump, Musk, and his cronies?
You can do this. You can engage people like me. If you've got friends and relatives in other parts of the country, bug them to do the same thing. Call, write, understand that there's few of them. And you can also look for ways, as we talked about, going down a Broadway Plaza and demonstrating that you don't care for a private citizen, no matter how much money he has, doing unlawful things and affecting his bottom line. There's also lots of ways as well to, I can't point you directly to them, but all those people who are winning those cases, most of them are nonprofits. They're out there going to court every day, and they're fighting this, and they're winning. So it's not that hard to do a little research to get there. I don't have to point you and tell you specifically. I can't. All right, now we've got to go to the bottom. Before somebody yells at me.
Okay, this question is from Tim. What is the Democratic strategy to bring together separated people to get the House and Senate against Trump?
I understand the separated people.
That's a good question.
Is Tim out there?
Tim? So Tim,
I'm going to repeat the question. Tim said, what do we do to bring all those people in to realize, I'm sorry for putting some words in your mouth, but I'm trying to remember as best I can. How do we build everybody together to stop all of this stuff? And I think that's what we're all struggling with. I'll tell you, having spent time in other parts of the country and spent a lot of time with people who represent them, their perspective of the world is not the same as people who live here. Not universally. I mean, there are people here who don't agree with me and don't vote for me and vice versa. We have to persuade people, and we have to do it passionately. I use the analogy lately from the restaurant business. I used to have competitors open restaurants and say, and insult their customers and tell them they were too stupid to understand how great the food was. Those people didn't stay in business very long. So when we go and lecture people who are persuadable, why are we surprised that they vote against us? And that's not to be unprincipled about it. If they're sexist, racist, unconstitutional, we've got to call them on that. But we also have to listen to people who aren't voting the way we would like to. And most importantly, we've got to make Americans realize that the Constitution of the United States is an amazing instrument. It's based on thousands of years of evolution. And God damn it, people have died for this. And we have to make Americans understand that our perspective is of value in Alabama and Mississippi as well. But we have to listen to them too. So how we build a coalition, of course, is more strategic than that. We've got to go where we used to always have people vote with us. So that's Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, upstate New York on that national map. We're going to win California. I'm probably being more political than I should be here. But you have to go where the votes are and where the difference is. 8,000 people would have given us the House of Representatives. If the same population that voted 4 years ago voted this time 2% more, we would have the first woman president of the United States, and we would have control of the House, Senate. And maybe we can bring that slide back up and just let it sink into people, and young people in particular, they didn't vote this time the way they voted 4 years ago. I'm not blaming them. I'm just, to your question, how do we get these people, how do we get everybody to vote? So,
Okay.
well, let me just read this one. This is the bottom one I was referring to. So that's on people like me, too. How do we motivate those young people to get out and vote? So 88 million, look at this, 88 million eligible voters chose to stay home. So when you look at the turnout, roughly a third of the population voted for Kamala Harris, a third of the population voted for he who will remain nameless, and a third of the people didn't vote. So we got to get people to come out and vote, and do it in a way that they can have their differences of opinion, but they don't be misled, because that's one of the huge problems we have right now is the internet and disinformation. There is an exemption for the social media companies, Section 390, I believe, that they wanted when they started, so that they don't have civil liability for their product. Same for guns, by the way. So the Congress has protected them. They don't need more time to get established. They're the biggest companies in the world. We should get rid of that so private citizens and groups can sue them. That's different from what you're saying, but how people get information is one of our big challenges. To your point about why don't you hear it, that's one of our frustrations, is we're trying like heck, but going to the editorial board doesn't work anymore. It's just a small portion of people.
All right, Congressman, we have time for 2 more, so if you can just pick one more question. Great, thank you. Okay, so this question comes from Anonymous. How is it that Trump has this much power? Why aren't the 3 branches of government holding strong?
The single biggest reason he has this much power is something called the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court. And that decision on a 5-4 vote changed all our precedent before that said that money was free speech. And that if you spent money outside of a campaign, they're called independent expenditures, you're not held to the same framework that if you give to a candidate. And that has just exploded. I mean, Elon Trump spent $250 million on one election. That's not American democracy. So this is, by the way, that's the single thing, but I mention this often, dark money, the work that Jane Mayer's done over the years investigating this really compelling work. The John Birch Society and his sons, the Koch brothers, have made this a 50, 60-year, very sophisticated campaign because they believe in strict libertarianism. They don't believe in the social contract the way I was taught, most of us do, and they're trying to destroy it. That's why Trump is in power, and that's why we are in the minority, and we can't let them win. There's a balance between individual responsibility and our social responsibilities. For those of you who've come to my things before, when you walk in, I'm on a cello, and if you've ever gone there, Jefferson had Hamilton on one side and Jefferson on the other side, and somebody asked him, why do you have Hamilton there? You don't agree with him on anything. He said, that's why. So we have this debate, but this isn't a debate. We're getting buried. Part of your question about why don't you hear from us is because we're getting buried without outside expenditures. $250 million from one person. Well, we've got to change that. We had a bill, John Sarbanes from Maryland. We did it multiple times. It did everything we could based on our advice of our attorneys to make sure the Supreme Court wouldn't turn it over to have that more accountable. We couldn't get the votes in well, we got them in the votes in the House twice, but we couldn't get the votes in the Senate.
All right, so our final question, which another reminder, if you've filled out your question card completely, we will respond to your question. Our final question comes from Ruth, who actually has many questions, so I'm just going to read her first one. Is Chuck Schumer right about the yes vote for government funding, or is he wrong? Why?
I voted against it, so I disagreed with Senator Schumer. And it was going to cause pain. So for those federal employees who wouldn't be exempted, they weren't going to be able to work if we shut the government down. I thought it was time to fight. And I thought the American people would be on our side if we showed some fight.
All right, thank you all so much for joining us this evening, both here at Mount Diablo High School in Concord and on the live stream. I'm going to turn it over to the Congressman for a few closing words.
So I know you all came here, it's relatively short. We'll keep doing these, we'll do longer ones. I appreciate you understand that the logistics of the interest, we're trying to accommodate it. We've looked at the Concord Pavilion as a potential venue. So we're going to do more. We want to hear from you, and thank you for coming so much.